She endured torture for 34 days. Every day they pressured her to give up the nuclear codes. But Major Diana Blackwood never said a single word, because those codes would save 200 million lives. The nightmare began when Diana's reconnaissance aircraft was shot down over hostile territory during a classified intelligence mission. Major Diana D. Blackwood, a 33-year-old Air Force intelligence officer with the highest security clearances, had been carrying encrypted information that could determine the outcome of a war that threatened global stability. Diana's background had prepared her for many contingencies, but nothing could have prepared her for what would become the longest documented case of resistance to psychological torture in military history. Born to a military family in Colorado Springs, she had grown up understanding duty, sacrifice, and the weight of responsibility that came with protecting national security. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. Her father, Colonel James Blackwood, had been a prisoner of war during the Gulf War and had endured 8 months of captivity before his eventual release. His stories about psychological warfare and mental resistance had shaped Diana's understanding of what captured personnel might face, but she had never imagined she would test those lessons under conditions that would push human endurance beyond documented limits. Diana's childhood had been shaped by her father's experiences as a POW. He had taught her mental exercises, meditation techniques, and psychological strategies that had helped him survive his own captivity. These lessons, learned during quiet evenings in their family home, would prove to be Diana's salvation during the darkest period of her life. Her mother, Dr. Patricia Blackwood, was a clinical psychologist who specialized in trauma therapy for military personnel. Diana had grown up hearing about the psychological techniques used to break down resistance and the mental strategies that could help people endure extreme stress. This unique background gave Diana insights into psychological warfare that few military personnel possessed. Diana's military career had been exceptional from the beginning. She had graduated summa cum laude from the Air Force Academy with degrees in mathematics and computer science, then completed advanced training in cryptography and intelligence analysis. Her psychological evaluations consistently showed unusual mental toughness and an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize information under stress. Her selection for the most sensitive intelligence assignments had come after years of proving herself in increasingly challenging roles. Diana had served in Afghanistan, where she had analyzed captured enemy communications and developed new cryptographic techniques that had saved countless American lives by preventing terrorist attacks. Her expertise in nuclear command and control systems had made her one of only 12 people in the entire military who had access to the most classified aspects of the nation's nuclear arsenal. The codes that Diana carried were not just passwords, they were complex mathematical algorithms that could override safety systems and redirect intercontinental ballistic missiles toward any target on Earth. The classified mission that led to Diana's capture involved gathering intelligence about enemy nuclear capabilities and launch protocols. Enemy forces had apparently developed new missile technology that could potentially penetrate American defense systems, and Diana's mission was to assess this threat and gather the technical information necessary to develop countermeasures. The information she carried was so sensitive that it was memorized rather than written down, making Diana herself the most valuable intelligence asset in the region. She had spent 3 months studying the nuclear codes until she could recite them perfectly under any conditions, including the extreme stress that might accompany capture and interrogation. The nuclear codes that Diana had memorized controlled a network of 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles, each armed with multiple warheads capable of destroying entire cities. These weapons represented the ultimate deterrent against enemy aggression, but they also represented the ultimate target for enemy intelligence services seeking to gain strategic advantage. If these codes fell into enemy hands, they could be used to override safety systems and redirect the missiles toward population centers in allied nations, potentially killing over 200 million innocent civilians while making it appear that the attacks were launched by American forces. Such an attack would destroy international alliances and leave the United States isolated and vulnerable to invasion. Diana's aircraft was brought down by a sophisticated surface-to-air missile system that had been tracking her flight for over an hour. The enemy had known she was coming, suggesting a security breach that had compromised the mission from the beginning. The attack was precisely timed to occur over territory where rescue would be impossible and where Diana could be captured alive. The crash itself was survivable only because Diana's aircraft was equipped with advanced ejection systems that deployed automatically when the missile impact was detected. Diana managed to destroy her aircraft's communication equipment and classified materials before losing consciousness, but she was unable to activate the self-destruct mechanism that would have eliminated all evidence of her mission. When Diana awakened, she was in a concrete cell that would become her home for the next 30. The facility was clearly designed for long-term detention and interrogation, with soundproof walls, controlled lighting, and monitoring equipment that would document every moment of her captivity for later analysis by intelligence specialists. The cell itself was a masterpiece of psychological warfare design. It measured exactly 7 feet by 7 feet, too small to lie down comfortably but too large to brace against all the walls simultaneously. The lighting could be controlled remotely to create any desired effect, from blinding brightness to complete darkness. The temperature could be adjusted to create extreme heat or cold, and the ventilation system could introduce various scents designed to trigger specific psychological responses. Her captors were professional interrogators who had studied psychological warfare techniques developed by intelligence agencies around the world. They understood that breaking Diana's resistance would require a systematic approach that combined physical discomfort with psychological pressure, designed to wear down her mental defenses over time. The interrogation team was led by Dr. Viktor Petrov, a former Soviet psychologist who had developed some of the most effective psychological torture techniques used during the Cold War. Petrov understood that traditional physical torture was often counterproductive, creating martyrs who could endure any amount of pain rather than betraying their principles. Psychological torture, however, attacked the very foundations of personality and identity, making resistance much more difficult to maintain. Petrov's approach was based on decades of research into human psychology and the specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited to break down mental resistance. He had studied the cases of hundreds of prisoners who had eventually broken under interrogation, identifying the precise techniques and timing that had led to their psychological collapse. The interrogation began immediately with sessions that lasted 12-16 hours per day. Diana was questioned repeatedly about the nuclear codes, military plans, and intelligence operations. When she refused to answer, the psychological pressure was gradually increased through techniques designed to create maximum stress without leaving physical evidence that could be used to prosecute her captors for war crimes. Diana's initial strategy was to provide false information that sounded plausible but would actually mislead enemy intelligence services. She had been trained to create convincing lies that would waste enemy resources while protecting genuine secrets. However, her interrogators quickly recognized this approach and began using verification techniques that made deception impossible. Sleep deprivation was the first weapon used against Diana's mental state. Her captors controlled the lighting in her cell, keeping her awake for days at a time while subjecting her to constant noise that made rest impossible. The combination of exhaustion and sensory overload was designed to impair her judgment and make resistance more difficult. The sleep deprivation protocol was precisely calibrated to keep Diana in a state of chronic exhaustion without causing the complete physical breakdown that would make interrogation impossible. She was allowed brief periods of rest, but never enough to fully recover from the accumulated fatigue that built up over days and weeks. During her wakeful periods, Diana was subjected to constant questioning that covered the same topics repeatedly. The interrogators would ask about the nuclear codes hundreds of times, using slightly different phrasing each time in the hope that exhaustion would cause Diana to make a mistake that would reveal genuine information. Diana's training had included instruction in resistance techniques, but the reality of sustained psychological warfare was far more challenging than any exercise could simulate. She had to maintain mental discipline while being subjected to constant pressure that was specifically designed to break down the psychological barriers that protected classified information. The resistance techniques that Diana had learned included mental exercises designed to maintain focus despite extreme stress. She would recite poetry, perform mathematical calculations, and review technical information to keep her mind active and prevent the psychological deterioration that her captors were trying to induce. Day 5 brought the introduction of more sophisticated sensory manipulation designed to destabilize Diana's perception of reality. Her cell was subjected to constant temperature changes that made it impossible to maintain normal body temperature regulation. The lighting was synchronized with sounds and scents to create disorienting sensory experiences that made it difficult to maintain normal thought processes. Day 8 marked the beginning of isolation tactics designed to break down Diana's sense of identity and connection to the outside world. She was placed in complete solitary confinement with no human contact except during interrogation sessions. The isolation was intended to make her dependent on her captors for any form of social interaction. The psychological impact of complete isolation was more severe than Diana had anticipated. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, and extended isolation can cause serious mental deterioration even in psychologically healthy individuals. Diana had to develop mental strategies to maintain her sense of self while being cut off from all normal human contact. Day 12 brought the introduction of false information designed to convince Diana that her resistance was pointless. Her interrogators showed her fabricated news reports suggesting that the war was over, that her country had surrendered, and that the nuclear codes she was protecting were no longer classified secrets. The false information was carefully crafted to appear authentic, using actual news footage and realistic-looking government documents. Diana's captors had created an elaborate deception designed to make her believe that her sacrifice was meaningless and that revealing the codes would not actually harm anyone. Day 15 marked Diana's first serious psychological crisis as the cumulative effects of sleep deprivation, isolation, and constant pressure began affecting her mental state. She began experiencing hallucinations and periods of disorientation that made it difficult to distinguish between reality and the false scenarios her interrogators were creating. The hallucinations were partly the result of sleep deprivation and partly the result of subtle psychological manipulation techniques that her captors were using to destabilize her perception of reality. Diana had to learn to recognize these false perceptions and maintain her grip on actual facts, despite the confusion that was being deliberately induced. Day 20 brought new tactics involving detailed personal information that Diana's captors had gathered about her family, friends, and background. They demonstrated extensive knowledge of her personal life, creating the impression that they had unlimited surveillance capabilities and could threaten anyone she cared about. The personal information was used to create emotional pressure designed to break down Diana's resistance through guilt and fear rather than physical pain. Her interrogators would describe in detail how her family members were suffering because of her capture and suggest that revealing the codes would end their pain. Day 25 marked the introduction of pharmacological agents designed to lower Diana's psychological resistance. She was given drugs that caused extreme anxiety, paranoia, and confusion while being questioned about the nuclear codes. The drugs were administered through her food and water supply, making it impossible for Diana to avoid their effects. The pharmacological torture was carefully calibrated to affect Diana's mental state without causing permanent physical damage. The drugs would wear off between interrogation sessions, allowing Diana to recover just enough to prevent complete psychological breakdown while ensuring that she remained vulnerable during questioning. Day 30 brought the introduction of elaborate role-playing scenarios designed to convince Diana that she was no longer a prisoner. Her captors would pretend to be American officials who had come to debrief her after her rescue, hoping to trick her into revealing information voluntarily. These deception operations were sophisticated psychological theater designed to exploit Diana's desire to cooperate with legitimate authority figures. The fake rescue scenarios were supported by detailed props, authentic-looking documents, and actors who had been trained to impersonate specific American officials. Day 40 marked a new phase in Diana's interrogation when her captors began using information about her father's POW experience to create psychological pressure. They had researched Colonel Blackwood's captivity in detail and were using specific details about his torture to threaten Diana with similar treatment. The threats against Diana's family became more specific and more credible as her captors demonstrated their ability to gather detailed intelligence about her loved ones. They showed her surveillance photos of her parents, siblings, and friends, while claiming they would be killed if she didn't cooperate. Day 50 brought the introduction of extreme sensory manipulation that pushed Diana's psychological endurance to new limits. Her cell was subjected to sounds, lights, and temperature changes that were specifically designed to prevent normal sleep patterns and cognitive function. The sensory assault was constant and unpredictable, making it impossible for Diana to adapt to any consistent pattern. Just when she began to adjust to one set of conditions, her captors would change the environment to create new stress and disorientation. Day 60 marked Diana's deepest psychological crisis, as months of accumulated torture began affecting her ability to maintain coherent thought processes. She had lost significant weight, was suffering from chronic sleep deprivation, and was experiencing symptoms that resembled severe mental illness. During this period, Diana experienced her first complete psychological breakdown, losing contact with reality for several hours while her interrogators continued their questioning. The breakdown was temporary, but it demonstrated that her psychological defenses were beginning to fail under the sustained assault. Day 70 brought new deception tactics involving fake communications from Diana's family and military colleagues. Her captors created elaborate audio and video recordings of people Diana cared about, apparently begging her to cooperate to save their lives. The fake communications were emotionally devastating for Diana, who had no way to verify whether the threats against her family were real. She had to assume that her loved ones were in danger while maintaining her silence about the nuclear codes that could potentially kill millions of innocent people. Day 80 marked the introduction of sleep deprivation techniques that pushed Diana beyond the limits of human endurance. She was kept awake for periods of up to 180 hours at a time, creating levels of exhaustion that made normal cognitive function nearly impossible. During these extended periods of forced wakefulness, Diana experienced severe hallucinations and episodes of microsleep that made it difficult to maintain coherent thought processes. Her interrogators took advantage of these periods of vulnerability to intensify their questioning about the nuclear codes. Day 90 brought Diana's closest approach to complete psychological breakdown as she struggled to maintain her sanity while being subjected to techniques that had broken every previous subject the enemy had captured. Her ability to distinguish between truth and fiction had been severely compromised, but somewhere deep in her mind, the nuclear codes remained protected. The psychological damage was becoming severe enough that Diana's captors began to worry that they might push her beyond the point where she could provide useful information. They had to balance their desire to break her resistance against the risk of causing complete mental collapse that would make interrogation impossible. Day 100 marked a significant milestone in Diana's ordeal as she passed the point where most prisoners broke under psychological pressure. Her continued resistance forced her captors to develop new techniques specifically designed to overcome her unusual mental toughness. The new techniques involved more sophisticated manipulation of Diana's environment and psychological state. Her captors began using advanced technology to monitor her brainwaves and stress responses, allowing them to optimize their torture techniques for maximum psychological impact. Day 1110 brought the introduction of virtual reality technology designed to create completely false sensory experiences that would convince Diana she was no longer in captivity. The VR scenarios were designed to lower her guard and trick her into revealing information during simulated debriefing sessions. The virtual reality deceptions were so sophisticated that Diana had difficulty distinguishing between the artificial experiences and actual reality. She had to develop new mental strategies to maintain her sense of what was real, while being subjected to sensory experiences that felt completely authentic. Day 120 marked Diana's entry into uncharted territory for psychological endurance. No previous prisoner had resisted this level of psychological torture for such an extended period, while protecting information of such critical importance. Her continued silence was demonstrating human psychological capabilities that exceeded known limits. Her captors were becoming increasingly frustrated by their inability to break Diana's resistance. They had exhausted most of their standard techniques and were being forced to develop new approaches specifically for her case. Diana had become a unique challenge that was testing the limits of their psychological warfare capabilities. Day 30 brought Diana to the edge of complete psychological collapse as her mental defenses began to fail after more than 4 months of sustained torture. She was experiencing constant hallucinations, had lost the ability to distinguish between reality and fiction, and was showing signs of severe psychological trauma that might be permanent. Despite her deteriorating mental state, Diana's training and mental discipline continued to protect the nuclear codes. Even during her worst episodes of psychological breakdown, she never revealed any classified information that could be used to harm innocent people. Day 34 marked the end of Diana's ordeal, when a rescue operation finally located and liberated the facility where she was being held. Diana was found in a state of severe psychological trauma, but medical examination revealed that she had never revealed any classified information despite being subjected to torture techniques that exceeded known human endurance limits. The rescue operation was the result of months of intelligence work that had finally identified the location of the secret prison facility. Special operations forces conducted a complex raid that overwhelmed the guards and extracted Diana along with other prisoners who had been held for shorter periods. Diana's physical condition at the time of rescue was shocking to the medical personnel who examined her. She had lost over 50 pounds and showed signs of severe malnutrition, dehydration, and chronic sleep deprivation. Her psychological state was even more concerning as she showed symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety disorders. However, the most remarkable aspect of Diana's condition was that psychological testing revealed she had never compromised any classified information, despite being subjected to torture techniques that had proven effective against other subjects. The nuclear codes remained secure, and the enemy had gained no useful intelligence despite their months of systematic torture. The interrogation facility where Diana had been held was a sophisticated psychological warfare laboratory that had been designed specifically for breaking the resistance of high-value prisoners. The equipment and techniques used against Diana represented the most advanced psychological torture methods ever developed. Intelligence analysis of the facility revealed that Diana's case had been part of a larger research program designed to develop more effective interrogation techniques for use against captured military personnel. Her successful resistance had not only protected vital secrets, but had also provided valuable information about the limitations of psychological warfare methods. Diana's medical treatment and psychological rehabilitation required 2 years of intensive care by specialists who had experienced treating victims of extreme psychological trauma. The damage to her mental health was severe and in some cases permanent, but she gradually regained the ability to function independently and maintain normal relationships. The nuclear codes that Diana had protected during her 34 days of torture were eventually changed for security reasons, but her sacrifice had prevented them from falling into enemy hands during a critical period when their compromise could have resulted in catastrophic attacks on civilian populations throughout the world. Diana's case became the subject of intensive study by military psychologists and intelligence specialists who wanted to understand how someone could endure such extreme psychological pressure without breaking. Her resistance techniques and mental strategies became the foundation for new training programs designed to prepare personnel for similar situations. The techniques that Diana had used to maintain her psychological resistance were analyzed and incorporated into advanced survival training curricula for military personnel who might face capture and interrogation. Her case provided unprecedented insights into human psychological endurance under extreme conditions. Diana's story became legendary within the intelligence community as the ultimate example of loyalty and mental toughness under impossible circumstances. Her resistance to 34 days of professional psychological torture demonstrated that properly motivated and trained personnel could protect vital secrets even when subjected to techniques designed to break human will. The psychological warfare methods used against Diana were eventually documented and shared with Allied intelligence services to help prepare their personnel for similar threats. Her experience provided valuable insights into enemy capabilities and the countermeasures needed to protect classified information. Years later, Diana returned to limited duty with the Air Force, working as an instructor and consultant on resistance techniques and psychological preparation for high-risk assignments. Her experience became required study material for personnel who might face similar threats in future conflicts. The facility where Diana had been held was later destroyed by military action, but intelligence gathered during her rescue revealed that her case had been part of a larger program to develop psychological warfare techniques for use against Western military personnel. Her successful resistance had provided valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. Diana's legacy influenced military training programs around the world as her case study became the gold standard for understanding human resistance to psychological pressure. Her achievement proved that the human mind could endure almost anything when properly motivated and when protecting something more important than personal comfort or safety. The 34 days that Diana Blackwood endured represented not just the longest documented case of resistance to systematic psychological torture in military history, but also a demonstration of human psychological capabilities that exceeded all previous understanding of mental endurance under extreme stress. Diana's sacrifice had protected nuclear codes that controlled weapons capable of destroying entire cities and killing millions of innocent people. Her silence during 13 days of the most sophisticated psychological torture ever developed had literally prevented potential attacks that could have changed the course of human history. The psychological warfare techniques used against Diana were eventually banned by international treaty, but her experience provided invaluable lessons about human endurance under extreme mental stress and the importance of psychological preparation for personnel in high-risk positions. Major Diana Blackwood had faced the ultimate test of loyalty and mental strength, enduring 34 days of systematic psychological torture while protecting secrets that could have changed the course of history. Her silence had saved millions of lives and demonstrated the highest ideals of military service, personal sacrifice, and human psychological resilience under impossible conditions.